What is up, YouTube? Grim Venom here, bringing you a Battle for Azeroth Beta Unholy Death Knight first impression video. Today I want to talk about the changes to Unholy Death Knight, both baseline and talent choices. This is the beta though, so all this could change. I want to mention ahead of time that, as usual, my main focus in game is PvE, Mythic Dungeons, and Mythic Raiding. And that being said, I'm not going to touch too much on PvP viability for any of the specs or talents. Let me begin with the baseline additions and removals, and any that relate to talents, I'll talk about them more in depth when I get to the talent section. First of all, Apocalypse artifact ability is now baseline. It's no longer linked to our weapon, which is really a huge deal for us. However, it only bursts 4 wounds at a single go. And that brings us to the changes for Festering Strike, which now only applies 2 to 3 wounds per rune. This means we can always open up with 2 Festering Strikes and 1 Apocalypse, and we never have to worry about getting that maximum benefit from those wounds. Army of the Dead cooldown has been reduced to 8 minutes. This is going to say 4 minutes on here because that's a PvP talent, but don't take that into account here. Our Gargoyle ability has been removed baseline from our spec. Our healing from our Death Strike has been increased. Our Wraithwalk has been replaced with Death's Advance, and Death Coil has had its runic power cost reduced. Additionally, Raise Ally now costs 30 runic power, so you want to be careful when you're going to need to use that. So let's go down and talk about the talents real quick. I'm going to bring up the talents right here so you can see them, and then I will bring the talents up over here from the live servers so you can see the difference, and we will discuss the changes. Starting with level 56, All Will Serve remains unchanged. Clawing Shadows has been moved, but it remains unchanged as well. And Infected Claws has moved all the way up from level 90 and has been nerfed by 5% down to a 30% chance for your pet to generate a wound. All Will Serve still serves no one, and it seems pretty useless. And Clawing Shadows is just a ranged shadow damage version of Scourge Strike, meaning Infected Claws is still the strongest option in this tier currently. Moving on to level 57, we have Bursting Sores and Ebon Fever moving down from 56, and Unholy Blight, which has just been added. Bursting Sores has been nerfed from 50% increased damage to 25% on Wound Burst, and it deals 20% attack power damage in an 8-yard radius down from 90% attack power. Ebon Fever causes Virulent Plague to deal 15% more damage, down from 20%, over half the duration, dropping its 21 seconds to about 10.5 seconds. So it's still a pretty strong damage boost. Unholy Blight is a 45-second cooldown with a 1 rune cost that surrounds a player and infects all targets nearby with a disease that lasts 14 seconds and deals 98% of attack power as damage. It's worth mentioning that the Blight around the Death Knight refreshes and pandemics the duration of the applied disease, giving it about 20 seconds of uptime. So on the 45-second cooldown, it's 25 seconds of downtime without any damage from this talent. The Unholy Blight actually causes a substantial amount of burst AoE. However, you might be inclined to think Bursting Sores is still stronger, and Ebon Fever is easily the best option for single target. However, after a small amount of testing, I discovered that Ebon Fever is pulling ahead on damage for all scenarios, including 3+ target cleave. But Unholy Blight is not far behind. Bursting Sores was the weakest choice in this tier, but the tuning isn't 100% yet, so there is still the possibility that it's going to make a comeback when Blizzard feels like it. In the level 58 tier, we're gifted with the loss of Sludge Belcher, freeing us with the option to generate a little more CC for our class. Asphyxiate remains, making us one of the limited classes to have a stun. With it being a 20-yard range and a 45-second cooldown, it's worth having. The other options in the tier are Grip of the Dead, a new snare talent that grants Death and Decay a 90% snare, decaying by 10% each second, and Death's Reach, a 10-yard boost to Death Grip's range and a reset of Death Grip on a killing blow. Asphyxiate's 4-second stun is basically a must-have. The Snare is a lackluster talent even for PvP, and the Death Grip cooldown reset is really just a quality of life leveling perk and nothing more. Moving to level 60, Pestilent Pustules has been reworked and now grants a 10% chance for a rune on a wound burst, instead of the fixed 8 wounds needing to be bursted. This is a nice feeling change, especially with the changes to Scourge Strike and Apocalypse. Soul Reaper makes a comeback with a complete rework, dealing a decent amount of damage over 8 seconds on application, and providing a 10% haste buff if the target dies in those 8 seconds. With this 45-second cooldown, this talent just feels all sorts of wrong, and I really don't see it getting much play. Our third option is Harbinger of Doom, a new talent taken from our artifact weapon, increasing sudden doom procs by 15% and allowing 2 stacks of sudden doom. This is a flat 15%. I don't believe it's affected by haste or anything else, but it sure feels right. The choice in this tier will most likely be decided by your level 100 choices. Moving to level 75, our defensive tier, Spell Eater returns, increasing AMS absorb by 30% and its duration by 5 seconds. Death Pact makes its way on the board with a 50% of max health heal on a 2-minute cooldown. However, it prevents healing up to 30% of your maximum health for 15 seconds by a healing absorb shell. And Wraithwalk sneaks back into our life via talent. Spell Eater seems viable for a predictable burst spell damage, and Death Pact, in my opinion, is just worthless for raiding. Our baseline Death's Advance allows us 30% increased movement on a 45-second cooldown, as well as a passive immunity to snare below 70% of base speed. A lot of people are upset that Wraithwalk became a talent, but Death's Advance is superior and allows attacking while active. By talent in Wraithwalk, you no longer have to choose when you want to move and when you want to attack. Death's Advance can provide that move while attacking, and Wraithwalk can be your mobility cooldown when avoiding mechanics, where you couldn't attack the boss anyways. It just feels natural. Or you can always say you got 2 sprints if you want to look at it this way. This is a great boost of mobility for a class that has always suffered from mobility issues. Finally, we arrive at the level 90 talents. Defile has moved up from the level 100, and the cooldown has been reduced to 20 seconds, providing it a 50% uptime on damage throughout the fight. Its damage is no longer Shadow Frost, but instead straight Shadow. The area of effect increases for each enemy within the area, but it no longer provides that stacking mastery buff. Epidemic has been reworked and finally fills a void Unholy has been craving all of Legion. Using 30 runic power causes your virulent plagues to flare up, providing a burst of damage to each inflicted target and damage to all nearby targets, causing a little bit of cross-cleave effect on AoE. Since your virulent plague is always spread amongst all the targets, this is a pretty big boost to our AoE damage. And this is, more importantly, that AoE runic power dump that we've been asking for. Finally, there's Pestilence, a passive that allows your Death and Decay a 10% chance on damage dealt to apply a wound to the target. Pestilence seems very underwhelming at first glance. Current testing of my naked 110 character copy revealed approximately 3 wounds generated per application of Death and Decay, so around 6 procs per minute. However, I feel that this rate will increase surprisingly with haste because it's based on each damage application. As I was testing Pestilence, I noticed that all targets hit by Death and Decay had unique wounds being generated upon them. So with more targets, this could provide more wound spread. When combined with Pestilent Pustules and Bursting Sores, while using Scourge Strike and Death and Decay, you could potentially generate some pretty crazy damage here. Epidemic is the option for burst AoE and also sees a boost from more targets. This appears to be a tier of AoE choices. However, I feel that Pestilence has the potential to be a strong single target option. Defile is dealing the most damage currently, but it feels like a sustained AoE choice with the spreading ability and the 50% uptime. So I feel like tuning needs to be a little on point here. That being said, after 1.5 minutes of sustained AoE, my Defile did 1000 more damage than my base Death and Decay. But overall DPS output on a Defile build was a staggering 8k DPS higher, and Epidemic was performing somewhere in the middle. I'm really unsure where this tier will go, but with our gear to scale and the possibility of Defile or Pestilence being the single target option, it's really up in the air. At last we reached the level 100 tier. This tier, as it should, will define your gameplay. First off, we have a revamp of Unholy Frenzy. This talent is now a 1.3 minute cooldown, providing 20% haste for 12 seconds and causing all auto attacks to apply wounds to the target. So we lost the 100% attack speed, but 20% haste is pretty powerful. And we got the Blighted Rune weapon rolled into this talent. A lot of damage in battle for Azeroth is being generated through white attacks, so this talent just grants those white hits a little bit more potency. However, upon testing this, I only managed 5 auto attacks in the 12-second window, resulting in 5 wounds, which is half the effect of Blighted Rune weapon on live. Additionally, we get our Gargoyle back. This talent is effectively Dark Arbiter. 3-minute cooldown, 30-second duration, its damage is increased by 1% for every 2 runic power spent. Death Coil is down to 40 runic power, so that's 20% increased damage. But squeezing in as many on live is not even remotely possible. The only difference from Dark Arbiter here is that the devs wanted the Gargoyle for class fantasy. Lastly, we add the passive talent Army of the Damned. This causes Death Coil to reduce the cooldown of Apocalypse by 1 second and Army of the Dead by 5 seconds. The value of this talent lies mostly in the more frequent Apocalypse, but on specific fights, it could be a huge benefit to have additional Army of the Deads. Compared to live talents, we've lost Castigator, Sludge Belcher, Corpse Shield, and Necrosis, and we've gained a plethora of new viable talent options. Ultimately, I see the talents breaking down into 4 different categories: Burst AoE, Sustained AoE, Sustained Single Target, and Burst Single Target. My character here is still level 110, equipped with all the Legion gear and just a direct copy I made to do this testing, so I haven't quested with him or leveled him up. As we continue through the expansion, I predict that our gear and stats will raise quite a bit, and that means some of these potential builds are going to change both in efficiency and output. When it comes to Burst AoE, Unholy Blight and Bursting Swords are both pretty strong, with Ebon Fever pulling ahead even in Burst AoE scenarios. Pestilent Pustules is always your go-to option in this tier. Pestilence and Epidemic are pretty even, but remember that Pestilence is requiring the Bursting Swords for its build, so if you want to use Ebon Fever, you're going to want to go with Epidemic. Unholy Frenzy is the only choice really for AoE, realistically, assuming that this is AoE, not single target cleave. Alright, so here I'm going to go in and test my AoE burst damage build. I'm going to start off with dropping Death and Decay, and then I'm just going to go crazy with the pumping everything I got into there and try and get that Epidemic to have a high uptime. So there's the Death and Decay. I'm going to pop some Festering Strikes. I'm going to summon my minions. I'm going to pop my pet cooldown and my Unholy Frenzy. And you can see now I start dropping some Epidemics. Spread the damage out, get a free Death Coil in there, got another free Death Coil in there, and gonna keep up the rotation here, busting some wounds, getting some more Epidemics off, just spreading that damage as much as possible, getting a free Death Coil in there, I'm going to drop Death and Decay whenever it's off cooldown because I want to have that AoE Scourge striking, and I want to get that more runic power for more epidemics. So that's that's what the build looks like right there. And if we look at the damage meters from that segment, you see I'm doing pretty good damage. And Epidemic is actually going to be my third top damage dealer with that build. So that's really a lot of extra burst AoE that's adding to our toolkit. So for sustained AoE, Ebon Fever wins with Pestilent Pustules and Defile, especially with more targets. And again, Frenzy. Less about bursting and more about longevity. The last build was good for, Mythic Plus, or if you want to be that guy in LFR who just blows up the trash packs every time, then that build was for you. This one is more single target focused with a large add up time for intermittent cleave. There's a lot of downtime with all these builds, but that's just a battle for Azeroth. Everyone is feeling that with the stat squish and the introduction of the global cooldown interaction. So now we're about to test out our more sustained single target build. We're going to be using the Defile, and we're going to drop that first. Then we're going to come in, put up our Festers, spread our Disease, pop our Pet, pop our Apocalypse, pop our Unholy Frenzy, get some more wounds up. We're going to spread some more of our Virulent Plague, and we're going to Scourge Strike there. We want to make sure we're defiling on cooldown, and look at that spreading. It just goes crazy, the spread. And while we are in there, we're just spreading our Scourge Strikes around, just trying to get that damage out. We're going to be using our free Death Coils. We're not using Epidemic anymore, so we might as well use our Death Coils if they're for free. And unfortunately, this still means that we're popping Death Coils in single target to get rid of our runic power. But if this is like one of those scenarios where we're attacking a boss and there's some adds nearby, then it makes sense to be Death Coiling anyways. So it's not as bad as like Death Coiling in the middle of a trash pack or something. So now their damage is going to go really high here because of Taserlac, so we can't really account for that because we're not going to have that in the expansion. It's not going to be worthwhile trinket to equip. But you can see this build actually did more damage over about the same amount of time, and it's really just about that sustained damage for a single target fight, a raid environment, if you will. Okay. Then we're gonna look at this build, which is just another option, which is using the Pestilence in AoE build. Remember, we're gonna need to have the Pustules, the Bursting Sores, and the Unholy Frenzy. And the idea is we're going to drop our Death and Decay. It's going to spread some wounds across multiple targets. Then we're going to try to Scourge Strike all of those targets at once with the AoE Scourge Strike while in Death and Decay, and hoping that Bursting Sores and Pestilent Pustules will give us that damage that we really want. So we're going to run in here, and we're going to drop the Death and Decay. We're going to start putting our wounds up, and we're going to pop our Apocalypse, summon our Pet, hit our Unholy Frenzy, try to break some of those wounds while we're standing in the Death and Decay. Now we're just waiting. We're going to spread some diseases. You can see this target over here has 2 wounds on it, so we're going to tab target and pop those wounds. That's something that we're going to have to keep track of, is wounds on multiple targets, because you're going to see wounds all over the place. And if you're not taking advantage of those wounds that are generating on your other targets, then you're literally wasting the effect of Pestilence. Its best effect is that it spreads wounds across multiple targets, allowing you to get that big benefit from that. So I did the least amount of attacking with this build, and we see the damage is a little bit lower. I think this damage is deflated because of our stat squish, but once we get some more gear and stuff, I think this build could be very strong, just because of all that spread wounds. So here we're looking at the actual Gargoyle build, which is trying to get for that version of what we have on live with our Dark Arbiter being our main source of damage, running with Ebon Fever, Harbinger of Doom, Defile, and Gargoyle. So we're going to start the fight off the same as always. We're going to throw this Death and Decay down. We're going to spread our wounds. We're going to spread our diseases. We're going to pop Apocalypse. We're going to pop our pet. But we're not popping our Gargoyle yet. We want to generate max runic power, plus try and get at least one of the two Harbinger of Doom procs. If we're lucky, we could get two. So I'm just kind of like biding my time here for a second, keeping my stuff going and keeping my runic power capped, which is an unfortunate feeling. But once I get a little bit here going, I'm going to pop the Gargoyle. I'm going to dump all that runic power into the Gargoyle, and I'm also going to drop these Harbinger of Doom procs into that Gargoyle. And this Gargoyle only lasts 30 seconds, but here, after just a few seconds, I've already got him up to over 140% increased damage. I think I'm going to end the fight at like 160 or 180% increased damage on that Gargoyle there. I get pretty unlucky there at the beginning of that with procs and setups, so it's more than likely you could hit that Gargoyle up to like a 200% increased damage for a couple seconds. So it's going to be a really strong build. You see the numbers pretty high, so it's definitely something nice to play with. And it's very similar to what we have on live. For a single target build that is bursty, Ebon Fever is a must. At tier 60, Pestilent Pustules will be strongest when using a Frenzy build, and Harbinger of Doom will be strongest with a Gargoyle build. As for the level 90 talents, Pestilence is the best single target option, but it requires haste. In a build lacking haste or in the early gearing, Defile could easily provide a lot more consistent damage. As for the level 100 talents here, your Unholy Frenzy and your Gargoyle are going to be pretty even. Your Gargoyle is a 3-minute cooldown with a 30-second duration, and your Unholy Frenzy is a 1.3-minute cooldown with a 12-second duration. So if you double that, that's a 3-minute cooldown and a 30-second duration. Therefore, the damage output and the time that they're active is equal. It's really going to depend on the tuning. If one of these is a lot stronger than the other ones for burst single target, and that's just going to change throughout the expansion, so it's something you're going to have to watch for. For sustained single target or a patchwork type fight, we're talking about a build that I really like. It's probably going to be my main go-to build for PvE scenarios with single target bosses, extended fights, and little or no cleave. This build's going to include Ebon Fever, again, obviously, with Harbinger of Doom and Defile. Defile is really strong early in the expansion and with heavy mastery builds, but mid to late expansion, Pestilence should pull ahead. I'm just going to run with Defile because it's dealing the most damage currently, and if that changes, then I'll let you know, and I will change my playstyle. And then finally, I'm going to pick up Army of the Dead for my level 100 talent. Assuming this boss fight is 5 minutes or longer, in which case Unholy Frenzy or Gargoyle would be equal. If the boss fight is 5 minutes or longer, then you're going to see that benefit from Army of the Damned, with quite a bit more apocalypses and potential to have 1 or 2 additional Army of the Deads, depending on how well you play your spec and how many death coils you can really fit in to your rotation. So this is our single target build. We're going to be running with Army of the Damned, Defile, a Harbinger of Doom, and Ebon Fever. We're going to start off the fight. This time I'm actually going to summon my Army of the Dead because this the talents actually affect that, so I think it matters to calculate into the damage. And then I'm gonna wait a little bit and start the fight. I'm gonna drop my wounds up. I'm gonna drop my Apocalypse. I'm gonna summon my pet empowerment. I'm gonna drop some Defile to generate more runic power. And look at all these Harbinger of Doom procs. They're just coming left and right. So I'm really just pumping out some damage right now, and I'm just gonna push this until I get to the point where I would reach. You know, you want to see the benefit of this is to get another Apocalypse in the same window of the other builds where you're not going to get 2 Apocalypses. That's going to be a big damage boost to you. And then, like I said, if the boss fight is going to last 5 or 6 minutes, then you're also getting a boost from the effect from the increased uptime on your Army of the Dead. This sums up my testing and talent preview of the Unholy Death Knight. I hope you found this video informative. If so, please remember to like and comment, and be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications if you want to see future content like my upcoming Frost DK video, testing and talent preview. And until next time, suffer well.